welcome into season 5. This is episode 26. I think I got that right this time of the Outlap F1 podcast. It's our 2023 Dutch GP race review. You've got Andy, and I'm along with my wonderful usual preview co-host tonight, but he's on it for the review this time as well. Our dynamic duo is back together, me and Cody doing it. Cody, how's it going, my friend?
It is going great. I'm very happy to have Formula One back. There's only so much history of Formula One I can shove into my brain during the summer break. So happy to be getting some new material. And we had doozy for the first one back. So very exciting.
Yeah, usually it's the race before the break that's the wild, weird, crazy, up in the air thing. But this is the one after the break. And Mother Nature certainly played a role over the course of this entire weekend. And we were going to get into all of that in just a little bit. But if you found us, welcome. We appreciate you joining us tonight. You can find our show as always on Twitter, and that's what we're still calling it. Instagram, Discord, Reddit, and of course, YouTube at Outlap F1 Podcast is our handle on all of those platforms. If you happen to be watching us on YouTube and you like what you're seeing, do us a solid, click the like and or subscribe button. It just helps us get our content to you that much quicker. And if you're on your favorite podcasting app and you like what you're hearing, do us a favor, click the 5-star button. Again, it just helps us come up a little bit more in searches, as we're trying to, make our web as big as possible and reach as many people as we can. If you'd like to email the show, you can always do that. Chat now at outlapf1.com. We'll get you there. Check out the website, www.outlapf1.com. We'll take you there. As always, we are always eternally grateful to our continued monetary supporters. So thank you so much. Dean Warwick, Yuri Dolchester, Paul Weaver, Quentin Warden, Kevin Kelly, Regan Stanzik, Timothy Brown, and of course, Jonathan Scott. If you'd like to become a member of what we call the hashtag Outlap F1 Nation, do us a solid. We'll put our support page, our anchor page in our show notes. $1, $5. It all goes into making the show better. I was telling Cody earlier tonight, stuff like this, stuff like the microphone, all of that we purchase, make the show better with things with the funds that you guys give us. So it all goes back into the show. We're not keeping it for ourselves. We put it all back into trying to make and move the show forward. So thank you so much for doing that. If you'd like to check out the good folks at Manscaped, we highly recommend that you do that. And you can also get 20% off and free shipping with our code OUTLAP. That's OUTLAP, all one word. Feel free to check that out if you're so inclined. And our final sponsor, the F1Guy.com, our buddy Vincenzo Landino, who's been on the show a couple of times. He has a F1 shirt line. It's good F1 quality merch at not necessarily the F1 quality price, which is tough to find these days. So go ahead and check that out. Especially if you're a Ferrari fan, he's got some really good stuff. I know Vincenzo's a big Ferrari guy, so if you're into that type of stuff, please feel free to check that out. All right, well, the break is officially gone. We had F1 in our lives on a Sunday morning. It felt good. I love watching my Formula One in the morning. It just lines the day up so perfectly. But we're going to start with our headlines of the day. And Cody, take it away. What was your headline?
My headline for the day is The Dutch Deliver. We had an exciting wet-dry race in the Netherlands, which led to a historic record-tying win for the home hero, Max Verstappen. Oh, and Alonso's back on the podium, too.
Yeah, very good. My headline is wrought with references, and if you can get all of them, I'll count you a nerd like I am. So we had our wet and crazy race, but at the end of the day, nothing else matters. Max equals Thanos this season. He's inevitable. And there you go. And if you're an McLaren fan like I am, as you can see, I'm downing all my good merch tonight. This one had me wanting so much more. Just feels like opportunity lost. But we'll get into all of that in just a little bit. We do have one little bit of news that we have to talk about. We normally don't do news, obviously, in a race review, but it happened in free practice. We also don't usually talk about practice. We got to talk a little bit about practice because we had a driver change happen as a result of free practice 2. Daniel Ricciardo having to go out of the car with a broken metacarpal. Looks like the expected recovery is about 6 weeks from all the smart people that I've read about it, which puts him maybe-ish for Singapore. Now, we're doing this on Tuesday night, so we also know AlphaTauri have confirmed his Daniel's replacement, Liam Lawson, who subbed in for this weekend, is also going to sub for him next weekend in Monza. After that, it's going to be kind of Daniel's call based on, one, his recovery, and two, I hate to say it, but how much pain he can tolerate. And we know Singapore is probably the most physically demanding track on the F1 calendar, if not, the most physically demanding. So he's going to have a decision to make in a few weeks. But Cody, it sucks, but I guess this is kind of the reality. But it's opportunity for Liam Lawson to try to make hay.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity for Liam Lawson, and I'm, for one, excited about that because Liam Lawson seems to be one of those drivers who's just continuously right on the fringe of Formula One, and there's just not a seat for him. So it's a great opportunity here to show his stuff. Feel really bad for Daniel Ricciardo, though, who's making a comeback of his own, and if he gets kind of outshone over these next couple races, it's going to not be good for his long-term return. Also, you could tell right away that something was wrong because, I watched the replay of the crash and, he doesn't really let go of the wheel right away and he hits the wall and the wheel like flips around really quick. Yeah. And he even said right away, they're like, "Are you okay?" He's like, "Sorry, guys, my hand." And it's like, oh, no.
Yeah. When you hear the cuss word, "my hand," that's not good. And that was just, a real emotion coming out because he knew it. It was, he was seen then in a sling. Afterwards, they take him to the hospital, and then it was revealed the X-rays came back. The good news is only a broken metacarpal, which is, I think, a finger, not a broken wrist. So, it could have been a lot worse. It could have been one of those injuries that could have maybe, broken wrist in the right way could maybe cost you your career. So it's good in the sense that he's going to be able to come back. It sucks for him now, but given what he's been trying to do to get back to where he wants to be. But we wish him nothing but the best. I never had any bad feelings toward Daniel Ricciardo. I want to see him get better and get back in the car and, make as much hay as he can. I think his overall, I don't think this is going to move the needle unless Liam Lawson comes in and is just overshining Yuki Tsunoda in the next few races. But this weekend, he was up against it. Talk about being up against the 8-ball. Tricky changeable conditions on track, one practice session to get going, and boom, you're qualifying. So, yeah, have at that, kid. But I think he did the best he possibly could with that. Yeah, exactly. All right. So we did have our qualifying session on Saturday. It was in those tricky changeable conditions, as we predicted. And as Cody predicted, something happened in Q3. So we will get into all that in just a little bit, but here we go. P20, that was Liam Lawson. He, like I said, was up against it, did not get out of Q1. P19 was Valtteri Bottas. P18 was Kevin Magnussen. P17 was Esteban Ocon. P16 was Zhao Guanyu. P15 was Nico Hulkenberg. So that was the entrance, or he made it out of Q1, but did not make it out of Q2. P14, Yuki Tsunoda. P13, surprise here, Lewis Hamilton in the Mercedes. That was surprising given the practice pace. P12, Pierre Gasly. And P11, not making it into Q3 in the Aston Martin, was Lance Stroll. P10, first American driver since 1993 to crack Q3, Logan Sargeant in the Williams. Congratulations to him. P9 was Charles Leclerc. P8 was Oscar Piastri. P7, Sergio Perez. P6 was Carlos Sainz. P5 was Fernando Alonso. P4 was Alex Albon. Williams showing very well here, especially in qualifying. P3 was George Russell. P2 was Lando Norris. And in P1 with a lap time of 110.567 on those slick tires, as my co-host predicted, Max Verstappen in the Red Bull. All right, so Cody, big thoughts from the qualifying session. I have several.
Yeah, there's a lot going on here. First thing for me is, how about those Williams? It was very exciting to see both of them getting into Q3. And then, of course, you had Logan Sargeant, bin it right into, the first couple laps of Q3. And I was like, are you serious? Come on.
I literally couldn't get the tweet out. If you follow us on Twitter, every time an American does well, I do the Eagle GIF. I literally put the Eagle GIF out, and 2 seconds later, I see yellow flag, red flag, and Sargeant with the little stop arrow next to his name, and I went, "Oh, you've got to be! Oh no! Oh no! You've got to be kidding!"
Yeah, it makes you kind of wonder what could have been. I mean, it's still awesome for him to get into Q3. I mean, big deal. Like you said, first time since 1993, which I have to assume was probably like Michael Andretti or something like that. And so excellent showing there. Could have been better maybe, but we'll just have to see how they do in Monza, which everyone seems to believe that's going to be the track for Williams. So hopefully Logan Sargent makes a good showing there. But even better than him, Alex Albon making it all the way up to fourth. I mean, that was fantastic showing from him. Seems to be driving the wheels off of that Williams all season here, putting it in places where, I used to think earlier in the season that he was putting the car where it shouldn't be, but lately, I'm starting to be a believer. It looks like we're seeing the Williams, upper midfield more and more often lately. And I find that to be very exciting.
Yeah, I mean, Williams putting it in places and a track that you wouldn't think would suit them. You would, if you saw this in Monza, okay, I can see that, given what their recent form is. But this was a track that you look at the topography of everything, and you go, where are they going to, it's a straight line car generally. This is all tight and twisty. How are they making lap time? But the upgrades that they put on the car obviously are doing the job, and they've learned, and they were one of the first to actually put a big set of upgrade packages, which means those upgrades are now mature and they know how to optimize them, which is where I think a lot of these other teams, especially, up in the upper part of the midfield or anybody other than maybe Red Bull, I think are still trying to figure that type of thing out. So Williams being first to that party, I think they're taking advantage, and good on them for doing it. Yeah, Alex Albon making his case to be the free agent to be in this silly season. If there is going to be a silly season, he's going to be the asset that's the most sought after. I have seen some reports, again, we're recording this on Tuesday night. Helmut Marko's already come out and said he didn't want him. Well, fine. I think that's better. I think they're better off separate from each other. That's perfect. The best thing for Alex Albon's career was to get out of that academy, if you ask me. But, and he's flourishing. Now, the thing is, does he want to, we talked about this in the preview, does he just want to go back to basically where he is? Because I think that Williams, they're building something. James Vowles is in there. They're getting the money from Dorilton. It's taken them a couple years to build it up. James Vowles knows what they need to do to make it work, and it looks like we're watching slowly but surely progress. It's all you can ask for from a team that was way off the back a couple years ago. All right. No, go ahead. Any other thoughts on the qualifying?
Yeah, just a couple other ones to throw in here. Liam Lawson, looks like he's over a second off of Valtteri Bottas, very washed Valtteri Bottas in P19. Can't really fault him too much for that, though, because like we were saying before, thrown in the deep end.
Yeah.
Almost no time to practice, wet to dry. Well, I guess while he was qualifying, it was wet. But, definitely difficult for him. Good on him just keeping the car on the track, I think. Lewis Hamilton doesn't make it into Q3, which was a bit of a surprise. And kind of a bit of a poor showing from Ferrari. Looks like Carlos Sainz in 6th and Charles Leclerc in 9th. So not their best day, but a pretty good day for your boy Lando.
I mean, it was being on the right. It was definitely sessions where being on the right tire at the right time was the thing to do. If you could, and if you were optimizing it, you were trying to get out and at the very end. Lando, you look at the end of the lap time, and it's basically 0.6 of a second off a pole. But over the first sector, he had Max. It was there for maybe about the first half of a lap. It was there. And I'm watching the timing, and I actually said the thing that I hadn't said all year, which was fly, Big D, fly. And that's a reference from a movie, but and he just couldn't land it. But the third sector, not Lando's friend, at least on that session, at least over that particular lap. But overall, strong pace from the McLarens. A little surprising to see Piastri that far down, believe it or not, given the relative pace that they were showing, at least over one lap. But, still solid in the top 10, both cars making Q3. Where was that going to happen? You look at Saudi Arabia, you look at Bahrain, it looked like a chasm for that team. So lots of good things still to build off of. I'm still excited now every Saturday morning when Formula One comes on, because I don't know what's going to happen. And just like that, we didn't know we were going to see a cattail. All right. Any other thoughts on quali before we flip over to the race?
No, I think that was pretty much everything I had. We're going to see here when we go over the race results that a lot of these results got pretty much turned on their heads.
Yeah.
Some of them were right out of the gate.
Well, it only took a lap and a half for the rain to make, if I want to rhyme it, I would say the rain made a big stain over the track and caused some drivers some pain, as we'll get into in just a little bit. It's been a long day for me personally, and if I'm getting a little loopy, I apologize. But hey, this might be one of those fun episodes where, you rewind it back and go, what were you doing? But anyway, so we'll flip over, we'll go drop the lights out, and we'll get into our race. We'll start with the back markers. And sadly, this was a result of a hydraulic failure. The first non-classified finisher was our American Logan Sargent, who could not make the P10 last, at least in terms of the race. P9 was Charles Leclerc, and what I would just say was a very painful day if you're a Leclerc supporter. He did not have a very good day at all. We'll also have to talk about one of his pit stops in a little bit. The third non-classified finisher made it all the way to the end, but the torrential downpour that happened on lap 62 caught out one Zhao Guanyu on a set of intermediate tires. He crashes out and brings out the red flag that was in the race. In terms of our classified finishers, P17 was George Russell. P16 was Kevin Magnussen. P15, Yuki Tsunoda, who I thought deserved a lot better. P14, Valtteri Bottas. And P13, hey, look at that. He does outscore his teammate on debut, Liam Lawson, in the other AlphaTauri. I have lots of thoughts on the back markers today. I think we're going to have lots of thoughts on just about everybody today. But Cody, I'll let you start.
When Logan Sargent crashed out of that race, I mean, whether it was an equipment failure or not, it was hard to watch. And I felt so bad. He looked so dejected. He's just sitting there on the hill, looking like, how could this have gone so wrong? And then they kept panning the camera throughout the race over to him, just sitting by himself with this blank look on his face. And I was like, come on, man, you got to get back on the horse. I know it's tough, but you did do some good stuff this weekend. So,
yeah.
I'm hoping that continues in the future, but he just looked like he was so, bummed out.
Yeah. You wanted to just put your arm around him and go, dude, it's okay. And kudos to the Williams team, the press people getting the word out. He didn't crash the car. It was a hydraulic failure that could have happened to anybody. It's just one of those unfortunate things. But we have seen, I know it's no points, but we're seeing, what I've been saying about how his season was going to go. When you get into the tracks that he knows better, he's doing better. And it is a rookie drive, and it's a hard ask for a guy to come in basically cold to the F1 car and try to get up to speed. And this weekend, he was in it. There was nothing not in it for him this weekend other than the final result. So I hope he's got his head held high. I hope he's got his sights set on Monza, because I do think that's the track where I think would really suit the Williams car. And if you're going to have an opportunity, and, the weather being what the weather is this season, maybe we get some more weather and he gets an opportunity to make something happen. I still think he's going to score points this season. I said that at the beginning of the year, and I'm going to stick by it.
Fingers crossed.
Yep.
We also got, let's see here, we've got Charles Leclerc, like you said, also not classified, so too bad there. George Russell had some contact, late in the race. Really too bad for him. He had awesome qualifying position and didn't really have anything to show for it during the race.
Led the race for about a half a lap.
Yeah. Well, so if I remember correctly, Mercedes was one of the teams, and I guess we're probably going to get into this in general, but Mercedes was one of the teams that didn't switch over to the wet weather tires in the beginning, correct? And then they just kind of kept staying out on the slicks, praying that the rain was going to go away.
There was about 7 cars that basically decided to hang it out. So the first couple laps, lap 1, the rain had started, and everybody had already started basically on a soft tire, par from I think Lewis Hamilton in 13th was the only guy who actually started on mediums. So everybody's on that softer tire, so they were ready for some changeable conditions. The first lap happens, and by the time they get to the final corner, it's absolutely chucking it down. And your first lap takers to go into the pits are Sergio Perez and Charles Leclerc, and a couple others, and I apologize if I don't get those right, but basically Sergio Perez's pit crew was ready for the pit stop. Charles Leclerc's pit crew was not. They were ready. They were there. They were all lined up. And apparently they forgot that, you have to put new tires on the car because they did not have any intermediates ready to go. So it rockets Perez, even though you lose the time on the second and third lap of the race. He's 7-8 seconds in front of everybody who tried to hang it out on slick tires. But the thing of it is all the radar said it was this little tiny shower. So you didn't think, like, if you're on the pit wall, I got both sides of this because I could easily see, it didn't look like it was going to be much. And it did bring some cars back into play later on when it dried out a little bit. The problem was it was going to take 6, 7, 8 laps for you to actually get there. And what you lost in that first lap really hangs you out to dry. So we come around to lap 2. Now it's Max is taking it. The vast majority of the field is taking it. The two interesting cars who didn't take it was one, Lando Norris, who started second, and George Russell, who started third. But all of a sudden now they're battling for the lead of the race when Max pits. However, that strategy didn't work. We saw Sergio Perez come from like 12 seconds back, and by the end of the lap, he's now leading the race by close to 10 seconds. Everybody now, Lando comes in on the next lap. He drops all the way down to 19th, but because there were still these 7 cars that decided to try to hang it out, he's weaving his way back through that. That never gets on TV, by the way, because all the TV wanted to do was show the replay of the first lap. So you missed like 7 overtakes. Like when he comes back, he's 12th. So like you missed all of that action. And I'm watching it and I'm going, this looks like a hot knife through butter. It was totally intermediate conditions at that point. If you were anywhere on a slick tire, you were pretty much done for the most part, even though, like I said, maybe 6 laps later, it came back to you, but didn't matter. You had to be on those intermediates at the start of that race.
Yeah, the Perez made it look easy when he came back out. He made it look like, that was the no-brainer choice. And I kind of thought, I'm like, man, they didn't bring Max in on the first lap. Like, Perez maybe's got a chance here. Like, he was pretty far out in front. And then, of course, Max comes around next lap, puts on the wet tires, and, plows through, and the rest is history. But, yeah, definitely looked very strange for all those drivers that stayed out on the dries, hoping that something was going to change, because it became very clear right away that was not the right call. And so many of them just kept hoping and kept staying out on the dries. And it got a little painful at one point because you're like, oh my God, like, do something, please. It's just getting worse.
I was in my hotel room in St. Louis, and I wasn't able to scream at my television because my brother was still sleeping. But if I could have screamed at my television, I would have. And if I wanted to throw something at it, I would have, because Lando's on the radio screaming at his team, guys, it's not going to dry out. You've got to box me. You've got to box me now. And, it was 1 lap too late. And like I said in the headline, opportunity lost. They've got to figure this stuff out. You had the race from a couple years in a row in Russia. That was Lando's call. He was overriding the team. Here, the team was trying to tell him to hang it out again. And you could just look at what's in front of you. Just look at the spray. Have a TV monitor on. You could clearly tell at the end of that first lap, that's when you needed to come in, and they just blew that call. I mean, just flat out, let's be honest. P2 on 1 lap, he's almost leading the race, and then he's P19 when he comes out of the pits on the intermediate tires. That was too late. Too late. Yikes. All right, so we talked about that pain. That was also the same pain that George Russell ended up back there with Lando and Lewis Hamilton. None of the Mercedes did it either. So it wasn't just the McLaren thing. There were lots of other teams that also made that same mistake. So, it didn't come back to them. Cost probably both Mercedes and maybe Lando a shot at the podium. But that opened up doors for some other teams, as, when we go through the rest of the results, we'll find out. All right, so we will now hop into the midfield, And in P12, even though they did kind of get the weather strategy right, but the car just isn't really there, that found Nico Hulkenberg in the other Haas, so no points for the Haas team this weekend. P11, usually tricky changeable conditions are good for Lance Stroll, but they weren't good enough to get him any points this weekend, and that's kind of where he ended up. We were just one off on our predictions about where he was, so we were close, but just missed it. P10 saw Esteban Ocon get the Alpine into the points. P9 was Oscar Piastri, bit of a recovery drive after one, McLaren hanging him out on the soft tire in the first stint, and two, a lockup right before the safety car, causing him to pit. He was the only guy that pitted, but ended up using his newer tires to rally back to P9 late in the race. So good recovery drive for him. P8, Alex Albon in the Williams. Williams making good points on the day in spite of the awesome qualifying. A little bit with the conditions that kind of threw him off a little bit, but Alex does manage to bring it home in P8. So good points for Williams on the day. P7, rallying all the way back from P19 at one point. That was Lando Norris in the McLaren. So coming home, decent points on the day. Again, as a fan, I feel like it could have been more, but I'll just leave it there. P6, another good recovery drive for Lewis Hamilton. He got caught out on that first stint as well. So good. The margin of victory for Lewis Hamilton between Lewis and Lando, 0.023 seconds. Another thing that the TV cameras missed, by the way, was that was on the line. I hope there's an amateur footage of it somewhere. I want to see the actual end result because I saw it on the onboard, but I didn't see it, didn't see the cross view. Wanted to see how close it really was, but that was very, very close. P5, rallying for the Scuderia this weekend, Carlos Sainz, after some tricky conditions in pre-practice, some spins in the qualifying session, but he manages to bring home P5 and the only points for the Scuderia on the day. And P4, Sergio Checo Perez looked like he might have been in for the victory after the first rainy stint. Comes back, only manages P4 after going off before the red flag, damaging his car, and then picking up a bit of an odd penalty. Cody, explain to me how you get a penalty for speeding in the pit lane on a red flag.
I really have no idea. And I feel like the red flag was the saving grace for Perez. I feel like throughout the season, there's been a few times where he's done things to shoot himself in the foot a little bit. And right before the red flag, when the rain was starting to get heavy and people were beginning to aquaplane, he aquaplaned off the road in the place where we've seen lots of drivers aquaplane off. And that was in, I believe, the end of the first straight going to turn one there.
Charles Tarzan corner.
Yeah. Yes. And he goes off, does a little bit of damage to the rear wing. Might have been out of the race if it hadn't been for that red flag, because not long after he went off, you had Zhou Guanyu go off in a much more spectacular fashion. Really nailed the wall, brought out that red flag, and that gave Perez enough, they gave Red Bull enough time to fix Perez's car, get him back out there, and it looked like he was still on course for getting a podium, P3, which is where he finished on track. But somehow, and they didn't really clarify on the broadcast when it happened, but somehow right after the race gets going again, he's dinged for speeding in the pit lane. And I was like, when? How? I thought maybe at first it was when he was coming into the pits right after his accident, because when you watch the replay for that, he actually slipped going into the pit lane as well and hit the wall there. And I thought, well, maybe he couldn't get the car stopped. Maybe he was speeding there. It doesn't really seem that that was the case. So I'm not sure how he did that, but you gotta, that's a pretty simple mistake. And he's the only driver that did it. I don't understand how he did it. And it cost him the podium. And I imagine Red Bull's got to be losing patience with, him. He should be finishing on the podium much more than he is. And they have to be beginning to lose patience with little errors like this costing him those points.
I think it was, if this was any other team on the grid, I would agree with you wholeheartedly. I think Sergio is doing exactly what they want him to be doing right now. They don't need his points. I don't think they care whether or not he finishes second or 20th right now. It is and the strategy showed it today. When they basically let Verstappen totally undercut him and completely undercut him on the road earlier in the race when after going back from the wets to the dries in the middle stint there. To me, that just shows that they're not really worried about it. I've seen there's a Red Bull news account that I'm following that seems to say Helmut Marko's pretty much all but said he's going to be back next year. Now, obviously, sometimes Helmut isn't the final decision maker in that, but usually what he says tends to happen, or at least it looks like. And we know Sergio's under contract, so why would Red Bull want to do anything to mess up this absolute perfect season that they're having? I don't know what else really they could ask for other than 1-2s versus 1-4s.
I feel like, though, that this perfect season, everyone is thinking that Red Bull has a chance here to win every race in the season. Never been done before, especially with the length of the calendar now. It would be amazing. But I really think that if they lose out on getting all of those wins, it's going to be because Sergio Perez can't clean up the pieces when Max Verstappen has an equipment failure. And he really, with how you look at how dominant Max is, and I mean, sure, he's Max, but he wouldn't be doing that without one of the best cars on the grid. And it doesn't feel like Perez is going to be there to pick up that win if that happens. And that's frustrating to me. So I imagine that'd be frustrating to Red Bull.
I mean, I get your theory. It sounds very much like, an NFL team talking about their backup quarterback. What do you need your backup quarterback to do? You need him to get him out of a game. If your primary guy goes down, you get the backup in there. Does he have to be great? No. Does he have to be spectacular? No, that's not what we're asking for. But get me out of a race with a good enough result to get on to the next one. And so I get what you're saying. I can see the criticism, but everything that I read seems to tell me the attitude is right now, it doesn't seem to want to matter. I think they're happy. They don't want to rock. And if they just don't want to rock the boat and they're just not saying anything, fine. Maybe they all throw us a shocker, right after Abu Dhabi at the end of this season, and we get one of those freaky, we think we're done for the year, and now the grid is all mixed up, and boom, here comes silly season 2023. That could easily happen too. I mean, that would be a huge grenade that would have massive effects up and down the whole tenor of the grid, and what contracts are ironclad and what contracts are not. And as we talked about in the previews, sometimes these contracts aren't worth the paper they're signed on, apparently, even though they can be worth lots of money. If a driver wants to go somewhere bad enough, it seems that they're able to make that kind of stuff happen. So we'll have to see if, there's more, tension amongst the Red Bull team if that continues to happen. But yeah, I think your criticism of him here is absolutely valid. He could have won this race easily and didn't. So I get what you're saying. All right. So we will now move into the podium, and the benefactor of all the craziness turns out to be one Pierre Gasly, who finishes third for Alpine, a team that needed a good result. And he was very, very, very happy on the podium, as he always is. And P2, welcome back to the podium, one Fernando Alonso, the Aston Martin, also taking advantage of those changeable conditions. The old dog still showing that he's got it in those types of conditions. And in P1, Thanos, it's inevitable, man. Max Verstappen in the Red Bull. However, he didn't get fastest lap. That ends up actually going to Fernando Alonso, who took the fastest lap point on the day. So, Cody, you got to feel good for Pierre Gasly. How do you not feel good for Pierre Gasly?
Oh, my God. He cracked me up so much at the end of the race there, because they're going through, the little driver interviews that they do right after they finish the race. And they're like, oh, Max, good job. You won the race. You tied the record. And Max was like, oh, nice weekend. Thanks, guys. Another one in the belt, totally casual about it. They go to Fernando, kind of the same thing. Like, oh, yeah, that was a tough one. Happy to get the P2. Wasn't the win, but, still a decent result. And then they go to Pierre Gasly in P3, and he's like, yes! He's so excited. And it was really refreshing to see that because, it seems like Max has got to be maybe even getting bored winning all the races or something. But to see that excitement out of Gasly was very nice, and did not see that one coming, miles away. He just happened to be in the right place at the right time, I guess, when the red flag came out, and managed to stay close enough to Perez at the end that he overtook Perez on that speeding pit penalty.
He overtakes Perez. He overtakes Perez, and he overtakes Sainz. And the move against Carlos Sainz was absolute brilliance. And we've talked, a lot of times on the show that we've thought Pierre could maybe take that step if the car was ever there. Clearly, in what I love about these changeable conditions is you see how close some of these cars are in certain aspects of when it's changing. And when it's that drying, I think that's where the Alpine seems to find its sweet spot. Like, we know when it's getting more wet, that's when the McLaren seems to find its sweet spot. But when it dries out, it tends to fall back a little bit. Here, as it was drying and getting closer to the dry, it was firing up its tires better, certainly better than the Ferrari was at that time, and better than the Red Bull was, or at least Checo's Red Bull was at that point too, because he managed to pull both off. So yeah, I mean, and I've said it many times, I think he's got all the talent. He just needs a car that can get him there. And you see the potential, and it is right there, and it's not that far off, which makes me just completely baffled at why Alpine just decided to fire everybody. Like, I get it, the results weren't there, but they're not that far off. So if they get it right with personnel, maybe in the next year, that's a team. Don't take your eyes off that team. They might do something next year.
Yeah, and Gasly's looking really good against Ocon too. I was thinking at the beginning of the season that, I like Gasly, but being in a new team has got to be tough. And I figured that Ocon, being in the team for many years now, that he would have the measure of Gasly throughout the season. But maybe that was the case a little earlier on, and Ocon had that nice podium in Monaco. But Gasly's showing up lately and definitely closing that gap. So looking forward to them continuing this rivalry in years going forward if the car improves.
Yeah, we shall see. And again, kudos to Fernando Alonso. I mean, my God, like I keep saying, like, the red flag happens, and so we should talk about the red flag. We hadn't talked about the red flag up until now, but the red flag happens lap 62. There's another cell of rain that comes through, and this one is much harder than any of the ones that we'd seen basically all weekend. Totally, I think, warranted red flag, given where the cars were on track and what tires they were on. So the red flag comes out, and Fernando Alonso's the benefactor of it because he ended up getting basically a free change of inters. He's on newest inters that he could be on, and comes home to bring it P2. We also got to talk about this Pirelli wet tire and how useless of a wet tire this is, because they put Esteban Ocon and Alpine puts Ocon on the wet tire, which by letter of the law looks to be the right tire at the right time. But it's so bad of a tire that it didn't matter. And it was so bad of a tire that the race director has learned and has figured it out that tire is a piece of crap, and it's better off as a paperweight than it is being on a Formula One car. Because when we went back to racing, it was an inter that was mandatory on the cars, not the wet tire as we've seen in previous iterations with 6 laps to go. So Niels Vidic has figured out that Pirelli wet tire is a freaking paperweight right now. My God. Cody, what's your take on all this, man?
They put Ocon on that wet tire, and he was over the radio so pissed right out of the gate, like, what are you guys doing? Nobody likes the wet tires. Why are you giving me wet tires? And the TV commentators were like, no, they've got a point. It's really, really wet out there. Like, it looks like for the moment, the wet tires are really what you're going to need to stay on the track. And we kind of saw that with all the drivers that were sliding off, and eventually that's what brought out the red flag. But I believe if you were looking at the track times, even with how wet it was, You'd think
So
Ocon's
slower.
got the best grip, is staying on the track with the wet tires. He wasn't any faster than anyone on intermediates. So, sure, maybe it was great for actually keeping him on the track, but wasn't gaining any time out of it. And, they got to the race directors must have seen that like, whoa, we're going to the wet tires, timeout. Like we gotta go to the red flag now because nobody should be driving around on those. And yeah, they suck. It's almost pointless having a a full wet tire because all anyone ever uses it for is for going around behind the
safety car.
Safety car. And then as soon as we get to racing conditions, everyone goes in the pits. They switch over to the intermediate because that's the only tire that's going to give you any decent time gains when it's wet.
Yeah, I mean, and you can do the easy trope and just pound on Pirelli, and I know there's been lots of people that have pounded on Pirelli for that. And maybe they can share part of the blame, but the other part of the blame is on the 10 teams themselves, because Pirelli, for whatever you want to fault them for, are doing what the teams have asked them to do. And what the teams asked them to do was give us a wet tire that didn't need to be in a blanket and could fire up right away. Well, they did that. And it does. And temperature-wise, they've said when we tested it, it does do what the teams asked us to do. What it doesn't do is perform. And it's really not supposed to perform. But it's so off of what the intermediate tire does that nobody, it's almost race suicide to try to put that tire on. That's why Ocon was so pissed. So, we all kind of, like, all the teams and Pirelli share in this blame a little bit. I don't know what we need to do to fix it other than we retire the full wet tire and either make the Inter more dynamic and more range filled, which is probably what I think the answer really ought to be, because we got to find some happy medium here. Because you basically, the delay of coming back to racing conditions once the rain stopped was because we ended up with an extra half an hour. Now, luckily we had it on the race clock. It didn't matter. But you have that delay because they had to let the track dry out enough to at least be able to run inters again. Now, that's one decision. The other decision was, what was your thought on, should we have maybe tried to do a standing start, or were you okay with the rolling start?
I was okay with the rolling start. In fact, I'm kind of lukewarm on the mid-race standing starts overall, I guess, in a way. And I guess it kind of goes both ways, because you're going to, if you're doing a safety car restart, you're doing a rolling start, but you've lost any advantage you gained anyway. So I guess from that perspective, you do a standing start, and you're still not really having any advantage that you carried beforehand. But I don't really like the standing starts mid-race in general anyway, because that's when you're getting the most chaotic situations, right? And it's understandable when that happens at the beginning of the race. It's the start of the race. It's exciting. It's going to be nuts. You're going to possibly have some people that lose out on their race weekend right there. But it feels a little unfair to do that further into the race for the excitement factor. And it is very exciting. But like we saw in Australia, like that whole race result got turned on its head because they did standing starts, with like only a couple laps to go, and it was totally nuts. And I think that's a little unfair to the drivers, because it's going to always be nuts on standing starts like that. And you might have performed super great the entire day and would have still finished really well had it been a rolling start, making it a little less chaotic. I think if it's wet at all, like further in the race, wet, like slightly wet, start of the race, fine. Standing start, keep with it. It's awesome. But yeah, further in the race, if it's wet at all, you shouldn't be doing any standing starts after a red flag. Like, I think it's a silly idea. It's going to get really nuts again, and you're going to destroy a whole bunch of people's races that, pretty undeservedly, I feel.
Yeah, I mean, it's the entertainment factor versus practicality, really. whenever I see a mid-race standing start, if it's dry, I'm usually okay with it because I'm like, okay, I get it. Okay, fine. We're restarting for whatever reason we had to stop. We should give teams an opportunity to make some more hay. Okay. In those conditions of what we had there at that particular track, I agree. I think a rolling start was the proper procedure. If it maybe was 2 or 3 degrees drier, I would have, with that amount of laps left, and I've said it before and I will say it again. We don't know what's going to happen in a situation because the FIA has refused to do what I've been screaming at for a long time, which is to have a lap chart of what we're going to do with certain numbers of laps left in a race. So you didn't know what was going to happen. We knew we had 6 laps left on the clock, and we knew we had plenty of time on the race clock. So we didn't know what was going to happen until they literally came out and they finally said rolling start procedure. And I'm like, okay, that made sense in that moment. But it shouldn't be a mystery. It should be, if it's this amount of dryness, we do standing start. If it's this wet, we do rolling start. If we have this many laps, it's this. If this many laps, it's that. It ought to be all pretty much formulaic so everybody knows and everybody can prepare and strategize for how they want to, so nobody gets caught out by, thinking it's one thing and then having the rug, lifted out from under them, because the race director decides to be racy one day and not on another day. So, to me, it should just be, that shouldn't have even been a decision. It should have been something that everybody should have known or were able to guess was going to happen. But I do think for those circumstances, in those conditions, I thought the decision was correct, but I think it shouldn't have had to have been a decision. It should have been something we should have known was going to happen.
Yeah, I agree. There should be set in stone rules for restart procedures based on, like you're saying, quantity of laps left, weather conditions, everything like that. Time left on the race clock.
Right.
If you're running out of time on the race clock, maybe you go for the rolling start just to get things going. But there's got to be better rules about that because it's a shot in the dark. And other racing series have set in stone rules. You know what's going to happen at the end of the race. You got a red flag with 3 laps to go. Well, they're going to go around one time and then they're going to do the green flag and it's going to be 2 laps left. And if you have another red flag or, something happens, race is over. It's set in stone. You know what's going to happen.
Yeah. I mean, the believe it or not, the one that gets this best is NASCAR. Everybody knows what the overtime rule is. Everybody knows that, on your last thing of fuel, you better put some extra fuel in that car because with the possibility and the legit possibility of being overtime, and having that happen. So if you knew that all that was going to happen and, in a Formula One car, you're starting with a pre-prescribed amount of fuel, but the teams push that to the nth degree. So if they knew there was a possibility of, and I'm not suggesting we should go to overtime in Formula One, or I'm not suggesting that.
No,
rule.
I don't.
I'm suggesting the consistency of something like that rule should apply here. But, then the teams would at least know and have an opportunity to react and adjust to something not necessarily completely on the fly. When I hear it over a team radio, that's the first time we know that it's happening. And sometimes they change their mind, which is even weirder. But anyway, all right. So we don't really have to talk anymore about Max. He's Thanos. He's inevitable. He's just on another level. Somebody come beat him at some point, but it doesn't look likely at this point. I don't really know what other accolades to say, but Mother Nature threw her best shot at him, and it didn't matter either. So there you go.
It does not. At this point, I'm just hoping he breaks every record that he can. Finishes every race on the podium. Breaks the win record that he set last year. Gets the consecutive win record. Like at this point, it's already boring with him winning so much, so he might as well spice it up by him just blasting records out of the water.
Oh yeah, I mean, and the closer we get, it's another round down. It's another one closer to those unthinkable things we never ever thought we were going to see. Now become more and more into play. So yeah, we will have to see where this goes. But all right, that is our Zandvoort review handled. We will take a quick break. A planned break this time. We will pay a couple bills. We'll come on back. We'll tell you where all the standings are. We'll then open it up to our favorite segment of the night, the fan email segment. We've got some good stuff on there. We'll do our awards. We'll talk about some predictions. Somebody is just rocketed on the predictions, and I don't think his name is me. But anyway, come on back, and we will get into all that. And we're also going to talk a little bit about, we'll do some IndyCar. I'll see if I can get my sound effect for IndyCar to play, because we got to talk about a little bit about the Bommarito 500. I was there this weekend. It was an awesome race. Pato O'Ward coming in second, so rocking it for Team MCL this weekend. We'll get into all that in just a little bit, so come on back. All right, welcome back in. This is Season 5, episode number 26 of the Outlap F1 podcast. It's our 2023 Dutch GP race review. You've got Andy and I'm along with Cody tonight, and we just broke down the wet and dry and then wet again Dutch GP. Now we're going to take a look at the standings and see where it all shakes out points-wise. So, Cody, if you take the drivers, I will do the teams.
All right. As of the 2023 Dutch Grand Prix, the drivers' standings are, let's see here, P1, Max Verstappen, Red Bull Racing, 339 points. Never going to lose again, blah, 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 blah. P2, Sergio Perez, also driving for Red Bull Racing. He is there with 201 points. P3, Fernando Alonso, putting a little bit more of a gap on that position this week with his wonderful P2 finish. Fernando is with Aston Martin Racing, and he stands at 168 points. Fourth place, Lewis Hamilton, driving for Mercedes. Got a little bit more work to do to catch back up to Fernando Alonso. Easily could do it by the end of the season. Lewis has 156 points. Fifth place, Carlos Sainz, driving for Ferrari. He's a little ways back from Hamilton with 102 points. But then two drivers hot on his tail. P6, his teammate Charles Leclerc, also driving for Ferrari at 99 points. And then tied with him on points, but behind on tiebreakers, is George Russell, driving for Mercedes, also with 99 points. P8, Lando Norris, driving for McLaren. Honestly, doing much better than I would have thought at the beginning of the season. Stood to get some good points this weekend. Didn't work out for him super well, but here's hoping they have some better races in the future. Lando's there at 75 points. P9, Lance Stroll, ways back from his teammate Fernando Alonso. He drives for Aston Martin as well, and he's sitting back there at 47 points. And then round out our top 10, Pierre Gasly. Jumped over a couple other drivers, I think, this weekend. Pierre's in 10th place with Alpine, and he stands at 37 points.
Yeah, the battle for P10 in the drivers is actually quite interesting because you've got Gasly on 37, and then I think you've got Piastri and Ocon, I think, tied on 36 for P11 and P12 respectively. So we're going to see, at least at the bottom of this table, I think a lot of turnover as we go into the second part of this season, depending on who does well and when they do well. So lots of still good things, good points battles. You know, yeah, P1 is done, and if you put a post-it note over that, boy, what a championship boy would you have. But I mean, look at that. I mean, second place is definitely going to be up for grabs, I think, eventually, if Perez comes back a little bit. But P3 to P6, you could definitely see some shuffling. All it takes is one or two good results. Ferrari actually get their act together and put one together. They could be right back up there in a moment's notice, too. So, yeah, I think we're going to see. I don't think this is how that top 10 is going to finish by any stretch of the imagination. I think we're definitely going to see some changes there. As for the constructors, yeah, I don't think P1 is changing on here either. Red Bull Racing Powertrains. I think the better answer might be how many points they didn't get at the end of this season. If you took the mathematical probability of maximum points, I think it's going to come down to maybe fastest laps, especially if they run the table here. Wow. 540 points. I think they could take like 3 races off and they still think they'd be fine. P2 Mercedes, 255 points. You'd have to have 2 of them to make, and you still wouldn't even, if they double their points now, you still wouldn't get to where Red Bull is. P3, Aston Martin, check in with 215 points, so that's good for them. P4 is Ferrari, so Aston Martin opens up the gap a little bit on Ferrari, 201 points. P5, McLaren, Mercedes, they're up now to 111 points. Their pursuit of P4, I think, got a lot harder this weekend, the fact that they didn't score like they needed to, so we'll have to see if that moves at all throughout the rest of this season. P6, Alpine, they move up to 73 points. P7, Williams, Mercedes, scoring points, now seemingly scoring points on a consistent basis. 15 points for them. P8, Haas, Ferrari, they check in on 11 points. P9, Alfa Romeo, still on 9 points. And in P10, AlphaTauri, still with just the 3 points there. All right, enough of our takes on the Dutch GP. We always like to open it up to you, the listener, in the fan email segment. We've got our two general, reliable stalwarts in the fan email segment, Rachel Fleming and the Formula this weekend. So, Cody, take it away, and let's see what they had to say.
All right. Our first fan email comes from Rachel Fleming, and she says, well, that was a race and a half, wasn't it? Was expecting a dull race, and it didn't happen. Firstly, well done to Gasly and Alpine for making the right calls and getting on the podium. Great result for them. Also, a big shout out to Liam Lawson as well. Such a baptism of fire, and managed to keep on the track in the race and did finish. So I agree with you there, Liam Lawson. Keeping it on the track, good things there. But what is the actual point of Pirelli wet weather tires? As soon as somebody puts them on, the drivers complain about them, and then a red flag goes out, which was the right call, by the way. So why can't Pirelli produce an actual wet weather tire that can be used? Thank you very much for the email, Rachel. And yeah, a lot of the stuff we had been discussing, like the awful Pirelli wet weather tires and why they can't make one that actually works. Hopefully, they're going to make some changes to that tire going forward, and it'll actually mean something again, or we'll have more wet weather tires that mean something. But yeah, I totally agree. Something needs to be done about those tires.
Yeah, I mean, if this isn't a microcosm of a problem that I think has been building for a very long time with respect to that tire. If Japan last year didn't show how useless of a tire that wet weather tire was, and then they went back and they asked Pirelli, well, what we want it to do, we don't want it to do any more performance, but we want it to heat up really quickly. And Pirelli went and did that. So it's like we talked about earlier, it's a combination of what the teams told Pirelli to do and Pirelli trying their best to execute given limited amount of testing. Because really, even if you douse a track, is it ever really full wet conditions? What is anybody in a test situation going to do? They're going to try to put out an inter and try to get some performance out of their car, because at least that tire is something that's raceable. So Pirelli's kind of in a no-win situation here. They've been asked to make a full wet tire. They did. They've been asked to make a tire that heats up without tire blankets. They did. And they've been asked basically, and whatever all the teams have told them is, well, we don't really care if it performs or not. Well, that's not on Pirelli. That's on the teams. The teams need to put more pressure on them and tell them what to do. Now, we talked about what kind of some of the solutions would be earlier. You could do like an F2 or F3 situation where they only have one wet compound and it's a full wet and you just have to deal with it. Or you could make your inter in a much more dynamic moisture range, maybe sacrifice a little bit of performance there, open up to some wetter conditions to have that tire run a little bit longer, a little bit better. Maybe it doesn't generate quite so much heat so they don't burn out as fast. That, I think, is the problem with the inner tire, is once it starts to dry out, it becomes a super slick, a super soft, for lack of a better term. Yeah, exactly. And then, you've seen the races where the tread on that tire is completely gone and it's basically useless. So lots of things to do, lots of things. Hopefully that this race will start a discussion about what to do with that wet tire. So I completely agree. Rachel, to your Liam Lawson point, yes, totally was put into the deep end of the water and at least managed to come off with a race result, which was more than respectable. We want to see what happens if he gets some sim time, proper Formula One race preparation, at least this week. And I think he's probably going to get the drive in Singapore. It's a really tough ask to come back from that injury with that timetable. I would love to see Danny back in that car in Singapore because I think he could do well there, but I think you might see Liam, and let's hope he makes the most of the opportunity. And yeah, you don't expect this race to be the exciting one, but then the sport gives it to you when you least expect it. I keep telling people that. Right when you think this is the boring race of the season, let's not watch it, bang, something like this happens.
Man, they when they moved the the Belgian Grand Prix to before the summer break for this year, I was like, man, like you're gonna go out on like a big bang, and then we're gonna come back on Dutch Grand Prix. Like really, it's gonna be a little bit of a boring one, don't you think, to come back from the summer break on? And yeah, totally upended my expectations. That race was probably one of the most exciting ones of the season so far. So we look forward to this one more in the future.
Yeah, it proves this track is raceable, which I think was a criticism of it. The thought was you couldn't overtake. Well, I think I saw some graphics that said that there was something like 168 passes during this race, and there was some ridiculous amount on lap 2 and 3, which makes sense given what cars were doing what. But yeah, so you can pass now at Zandvoort. That's been proven.
All right, and then our other email here comes from the Formula, and they say, "Welcome back from the summer break. Post Dutch GP bullet points. What an awesome race we had. The rain and strategy battles were fascinating, and the Dutch fans put on quite a show themselves." They also say, "What are the wet weather tires for? I'm not joking. If the FIA consistently seems these tracks are unsafe when teams put on the wet tires, then get rid of the wet tire. Ferrari mechanics not having tires ready for a pit stop is the most Ferrari thing ever. People need to be canned at that team, blunder after blunder." And then the last point is, speaking of blunders, how about Checo? Spins off, hits the pit wall, speeds in the pit lane, can't stay in DRS range on the restart to challenge Max, can't overtake Alonso. I'm telling you, if Red Bull had a legit constructors fight on their hands, he'd be gone. Thank you for the email, Formula. And yeah, where to start with this one? We already pretty much went over the wet weather tires and beat that one to death. So let's start with the Checo blunders. I totally, we kind of nailed this one a little bit before too, but I agree that had they, were they in a situation where they were fighting for the Constructors' Championship, he would be much more under the gun because, they're so far out in front, like Andy was saying before. They're so far out in front that it doesn't really matter right now, Checo's performance overall, because Max is carrying that team to the Constructors' Championship no matter what. And he's not doing awful. He's serviceable. He's finishing well in the points most times. Got a couple wins on the year, a handful more podiums. But it just seems like times that he's not on the podium are for really weird reasons or just strange underperformance. And yeah, this one was a doozy at the end of the race with, spinning off. I mean, the spinning off part, can't fault him too much for that. A lot of drivers were going off the track because of how wet it was. But hitting pit wall, speeding in the pit lane, that's the big one for me, is I just don't get how he did that. And that's what really cost him that podium. So I'm hoping he improves over the course of the rest of the season, because they're going to keep him around for now because, like Andy said, he's not really the factor of whether this team's going to win or not. But if it gets closer over these next couple seasons before the reg changes, they might be seriously looking at some other drivers.
And they might just be hoping that, time catches up to Checo and he decides to call time on his career. That might be, I think, ultimately the strategy there, is they're just going to let Checo decide, he's got one more year on his current contract, and maybe after next year, this becomes a much bigger discussion. I think for this year, they are just basking in the glory that they have right now and aren't doing anything to rock that boat. So that and when we talked about this earlier in the show about Checo, so I see the point. I understand it. Like, you want your backup quarterback to get you out of a game if you can, and he just doesn't seem like he can right now. But we'll have to see kind of where the team feels about him moving forward. So something to watch for sure. That is going to be. I still think it's going to be a linchpin. Like, you're either going to see it, like I said, right after the season ends, a shock. Ferrari moving on from Sergio Perez, or not Ferrari, Red Bull moving on from Sergio Perez, excuse me. That would be a total headline if Ferrari were moving on. or they're just going to try to see the end of this contract out and then wish Checo all the best and just let him go off into the sunset, which may just be what they want to end up doing. As for the Ferrari mechanics thing, we've talked many times on this show about the Ferrari decision desk. I think this was yet another example of the Ferrari decision desk. I think this was Leclerc saying, I'm boxing, I'm coming, and nobody was ready. Certainly what it looked like. I'd want to look at the team radio and confirm that, but that's certainly what it looked like to me. And we talked about the tires. They are paperweights at this point. The best thing that they should do is chop them up and let children play on the chopped up rubber on a playground, because that might be more useful than being on an F1 car at this point. And kudos to the Dutch fans. They were definitely boisterous and joyous and kept up their attitudes well. And you know what I didn't see until the absolute end? We talked about the flare thing. I didn't see any flares for the majority of the weekend. So kudos on the organizers for clamping down on that stuff. So good on you there.
When he won the race, you saw a couple in the main grandstands there get lit up, maybe like 2 or 3 of them. But yeah, overall, really not a lot of them. Wasn't as big a deal as it has been in the years past. Nothing during the race. Although, those flares going out in the wet might have been kind of gross anyway. But yeah, definitely good job cracking down on that. Everything that I've heard from people, posting what their experiences were at the track was that the fans are awesome. They're huge into Max. Apparently, they've got a big thing for rave music. Apparently, that's like any time they had breaks at the track, the rave music came on.
Whatever that mascot was, that lion mascot, I don't know who designed that, but he came out, and then they had the guy in the big orange suit that was coming out wearing the red flag and doing all sorts of interesting things. Let's put it that way. Yeah. They were definitely keeping the crowd pumped and going, and it looked like they were responding, which, they try that sometimes at COTA, where they bring out a DJ and they try to get the crowd, and the crowd's like, it just doesn't work there. But
it's weird when they do it at COTA. I'm also gonna give them the benefit, though, that when they do it at COTA, it's made more weird by the fact that it's like freaking like 90 degrees. And everyone's really hot.
Yeah,
it just doesn't want that. They're just like, yeah, whatever, man. I just want to sit in the shade and drink some water.
I came here to sip some beer and watch some cars. That's about all I want to do. All right. Very good. Thank you, both Rachel and the Formula, for your contributions to the show. We appreciate them as always. All right. So we will get into our awards really quickly. We will start with the rubbish. Cody, I have a good idea as to where you're going with this, because and you probably have a good idea about where I'm going with it too. So Cody, I'll let you go first and we'll go from there.
Yep. I had a little bit of a hard time picking the rubbish award because I feel like there was a pretty good mix of rubbish in this race, but I ended up going with Checo, mostly because that podium was on for him and was on for him even after he went off and damaged his car and hit the wall in the pit lane. He still could have had it, and he kind of threw it away. So, yeah, I'm sorry, Checo, but you're getting my rubbish award this week.
Yeah, all right. So mine's going to go out. I got to give it to my homeboys when they screw up, and I thought they screwed up this weekend. So McLaren, you've got to start listening to your drivers when they're telling you it's wet. Listening to Lando beg and plead while the engineers are telling him, well, we think it's a short rain shower, and if you can hang it out and keep it on the track, it's going to work. Well, it obviously didn't. Meanwhile, here comes Sergio Perez, 30 seconds down on the road, blasting by you like a hot knife through butter and making it look easy. The drivers are the ones that know where the conditions are more than anybody else. And I know this has been a thing in the past, and Lando got hung out, tried to do the same thing in Russia a couple of years ago. He's a different guy. It's a different set of circumstances. You got to play these things as they come. It's not 1-to-1 here. This was a track clearly that was ready for intermediates at that point. The commentators were saying it. I was yelling at my television about it. All you had to do was look out a window and see what it was doing, and that should have told you what to do. Anyway, yeah, and it took a great qualifying effort, and it rendered it almost moot. And solid on Lando for rallying back all the way to where he was. but you felt like there was a lot more in the car this weekend, and you kind of shot yourselves in the foot. So, yuck. Anyway, and my other rubbish, put the Pirelli wet tire in the bin. You can throw that in the bin anytime you want to. That thing is a paperweight. All right, so we will move on to the analysis paralysis. Mine is very, very simple. Any team who thought it was a good idea to hang it out on slicks in the middle of a downpour, get my analysis paralysis award. And you can look through those bottom 7 cars. All of them deserved an analysis paralysis because what the hell were you thinking?
My analysis paralysis is what you said. Plain and simple. I guess if I had to give a particular shout out, Mercedes seems like they are normally right on for the strategy. And even when their car is not at its best at particular tracks, they seem to always be scoring decent points because they're making the race strategy work. And this seemed to be a rare occasion where they blew it in the beginning because, if memory serves, the Mercedes cars were some of those guys who were sitting out there on the slicks at the beginning of the race while it was coming down and letting those results just slip further and further away.
Now, I will say this, and maybe this is my homeboy fanboy coming out. I will give Lando some credit here. He could have let that completely derail him. He had every reason to be pissed off. He could have done 2 or 3 different team radio rants about it. But there was a moment when his race engineer kind of apologized, and Lando just said, "You know what? Yup, all good, mate. I'm just going to go to work." And that's what he did. And I think in years past, he might have let that unravel him. And he could have done, you would have had some YouTube-worthy moments of team radio there. And I think that is a sign of the maturation that's going on with that guy right now. And I know he still does some childish things. He did finally give he was there for the representation of the Hungaroring trophy to one Max Verstappen earlier today. I saw that on social media. He was there. He was not allowed to touch it. He didn't touch it. Max has the trophy. It's all good. He still does some childish stuff childish things every once in a while. But at least in a race car, you're seeing real progression and real maturation. And as a fan, I'm encouraged by that. So that's my little plug there. All right, we will now move into the dark horse of the day. How do you not give this to Pierre Gasly for an Alpine team that has seen a lot of change and a lot of things not go well for them in the last couple of years? It's good to see some light get shown on those guys, particularly Pierre, who I love the raw emotion. I still think there's talent there. I want to see more of it. Good on you, Pierre.
I don't know how you would pick anyone else for dark horse either, because I also went with Gasly. Would not have picked him in a million years to be on the podium this weekend, and he made it happen. And it wasn't all luck. There was a lot of luck involved, but he definitely worked for it too, and made it happen, especially after that red flag restart. So good on you, Gasly. Getting that P3, your first podium with Alpine. It was a good one.
Yep, absolutely. All right, we'll move to the driver of the day. I don't know how you can't give it to Max. Through rain, through the dry, through the light, through the dark, through the storm. Doesn't seem to matter. He is Thanos. And kudos to Red Bull for giving us one hell of a shot of the pit stop in the downpour. They're going to show that as like how to do a Formula One pit stop, I think, for years. So just for an awesome shot, I'll give it to you there. Cody, what's your thoughts?
I'm actually not going to go with Max for driver of the day because I think that would be a little boring.
It's
Max
too easy.
has won 9 races in a row, so he's almost automatically the driver of the day at this point. But for this one, I'm going to go with Fernando Alonso. Getting that P2, we all thought that the Aston Martin was going to start slumping away the rest of the season. And albeit they did apparently bring some upgrades to the car this weekend. But it looks like Aston Martin's back. Fernando's back with a vengeance, and especially on that first lap, starting in P5, getting a couple of overtakes right out of the gate as the track was going to hell, made it stick for the rest of the race. So awesome drive from Alonso.
The low line he takes in turn 3 on that first lap, I don't know if there's anybody other driver on the grid that pulls that move off and makes it stick like that. The awareness, like I said, just in terms of the raw talent, it's still there. As seasoned as he is of a veteran, to still have those instincts and that talent, and that it hasn't, started to leave him at all. It doesn't seem like he's not doing anything but other than peaking. So, yeah, we may have him for another year, maybe two. We'll have to see. And eventually, time catches up with everybody, but you do have to sit back.
Catching up to him.
Yeah, I mean, he's just outrunning it. He's literally just in front of it. He's got his DRS, and he's just outrunning Father Time at the moment.
That's a good one.
All right, so now we get into the part that I've been dreading to all weekend, the prediction results. But my friend Cody continues to just dominate here. Well, he didn't dominate this time, but he won yet again. He scores 4 points on the weekend. He got the pole sitter, Max. He got the quality time because it was faster. He got the P1 on the podium, that being Max. And the winning formula for you was the prop bet because Q3 was on slicks and not inters. I finished with 3 points. I got the pole sitter. I also got Max on the podium. I got the fastest race time. I was not that far off. It was only a couple tenths off the race time, but that's not enough for me to overtake you this weekend. So yet again, I can't take my hat off, but I will tip it to you, sir. Good job on this weekend's predictions.
When the commentators were coming on to the broadcast going into P3, and we're like, or Q3, and we're like, yeah, of course everyone's going to be going over to the slicks now. I was like, hell yeah.
I saw that, and I'm like, well, we got to the first two, and there's no more rain, is there? Dang it. And my lap times were doing well through like Q2. I was like, okay, well, it's 118, 119. And then they started Q3, and there were a couple in the 110, 112s and 113s on the first run. I'm like, it's drying out too much. I'm just going to not win. And I didn't. So there you go. Good job. I tip my cap. All right. Before we do our final thoughts, did just want to do a quick shout out to everybody who interacted with us in St. Louis this weekend at the Bommarito 500. It was a heck of a good show. We got really, really lucky with the weather. After Saturday was bit the washout, I drove and basically played peekaboo with that rain shower the entire drive down from Chicago. But on Sunday, it was nice. It was cloudy, which is actually like the ideal conditions to watch a race because you're not getting fricasseed by the sun. And a couple of followers of our show happened to be there, and we were sharing pics and stuff. So it was all good to see. Maybe next year we can try to do a meetup in one of the sections if we can ever coordinate it. And shout out to the venue. I want to give a shout out to the venue. Not a lot of venues do this. A lot of venues will say they have Wi-Fi, and then you try to connect to it, and it just doesn't work. Theirs at Worldwide Technology Raceway worked well. And it allowed me to at least put my IndyCar app on, and I could hear some of the commentary in team radio, because at a race like that, once the leader starts to lap cars, it gets really hard to remember who's where, and you got to pick up everything. So shout out to Worldwide Technology Raceway for the working internet, allowing the IndyCar app to work. They put on a really good show. They did have some big screens, but they weren't around where I was. But yeah, fun time, good show. Sorry, Joseph Newgarden couldn't do the oval thing and take all of them. However, it does. Scott Dixon, still really good. Talk about another guy who's outrunning Father Time. Scott Dixon Scott Dixon and Fernando Alonso are just in a club that are just continuing to do amazing things in race cars the older they get. So you just tip your cap to him. And hey, I got to see a McLaren podium in person for the first time in a long time. Mm-hmm. So good job, Pato O'Ward, to come home at P2.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So I guess that is the end of our rundown. My final thought is this. If the rain helped you, don't let it go to your head. If the rain hurt you, you don't have to let it sting that long, because why? We go again this weekend. We have quick turnaround on doing a preview. We're probably going to do our preview in a couple of days. Cody's got some things that he's got to do. I have some things that I have to do over the course of the next couple of days, but we will try to get a preview episode out when we can. We will hopefully all be back in some form over the nice thing is we got a nice hot, long holiday weekend. So I'm not sure exactly when we're going to do the review recording, but we are going to try to get it out hopefully Sunday or Monday evening. That's what we'll plan for, but we will, as we continue to do, move like water in this season of apparently a lot of water, at least in Europe. But anyway, Cody, any final thoughts before we hop on out?
Looking forward to this race at Monza. Monza is another one I'm a big fan of. Very jealous of James having, or not James, John actually went there a number of years ago. A little jealous of that. And one of my favorite races that I've ever seen live was when Daniel Ricciardo won for McLaren at Monza. I thought that race was just phenomenal. I always think of that whenever they go racing now at Monza. So, looking forward and hoping it's another banger.
Yeah, I mean, this could be a track where a unique setup could throw some shockers. It could also be a parade for, the 50-some laps that it is. So somewhere in between is usually what we get. So I'm hoping more of the former. Crazy, changeable, weird conditions. Let's have some fun at the Temple of Speed. Let's all be safe at the Temple of Speed, number one. Get everybody through that weekend, all safe and sound. But let's have some fun in Monza this weekend, and let's see what can happen. So we will be back. We will recap all of the good stuff from there next weekend. So for Cody and for everybody else connected to the show, it's been Andy. We love doing this, and as always, may all your laps be fast. I almost hit the wrong button.